lavish, extravagant, and indiscreet, in another may be wise, prudent, and even absolutely necessary. In forming your opinion of the comparative merits of Christian men, never forget the old rule, distinguish between times. Place yourself in each man's position. Do not judge what was a right course of action in other times by what seems a right course of action in your own. Now, the times when Whitefield lived were unquestionably the worst times that have ever been known in this country since the Protestant Reformation. There never was a greater mistake than to talk of the good old times. The times of the 18th century, at any rate, were bad old times, unmistakably. Whitefield was born in 1714. He died in 1770. It is not saying too much to assert that this was precisely the darkest age that England has passed through in the last 300 years. Anything more deplorable than the condition of the country as to religion, morality, and high principle from 1700 to about the era of the French Revolution, it is very difficult to conceive. The state of religion in the established church can only be compared to that of a frozen or palsied carcass. There were the time-honoured formularies which the wisdom of the reformers had provided. There were the services and lessons from Scripture just in the same order as we have them now. But as to preaching the gospel in the established church, there was almost none. The distinguishing doctrines of Christianity, the atonement, the work and office of Christ and the Spirit, were comparatively lost sight of. The vast majority of sermons were miserable moral essays, utterly devoid of anything calculated to awaken, convert, save, or sanctify souls. The curse of Black Bartholomew Day seemed to rest upon our church. For at least a century after casting out 2,000 of the best ministers in England, our establishment never prospered. There were some learned and conscientious bishops at this era, beyond question. Such men were Secker and Gibson, and Louth, and Warburton, and Butler, and Horne. But even the best of them sadly misunderstood the requirements of the day they lived in. They spent their strength in writing apologies for Christianity and contending against infidels. They could not see that without the direct preaching of the essential doctrines of Christ's gospel, their labours were all in vain. And as to the majority of the bishops, they were potent for negative evil, but impotent for positive good. Giants at stopping what they thought disorder, but infants at devising anything to promote real order. Mighty to repress over-zealous attempts at evangelization, but weak to put in action any remedy for the evils of the age. Eagle-eyed at detecting any unhappy wight who trod on the toes of a rubric or canon, but blind as bats to the flood of indolence and false doctrine with which their dioceses were everywhere deluged. That there were many well-read, respectable, and honourable men among the parochial clergy at this period, it would be wrong to deny. But few, it is to be feared, out of the whole number, preached Christ crucified in simplicity and sincerity. Many, whose lives were decent and moral, were notoriously Arians, if not Socinians. Many were totally engrossed in secular pursuits. They neither did good themselves, nor liked anyone else to do it for them. They hunted, they shot, they drank, they swore, they fiddled, they farmed, they toasted church and king, and thought little or nothing about saving souls. And as for the men who dared to preach the doctrine of the Bible, the articles and the homilies, he was sure to be set down as an enthusiast and fanatic. The state of religion among the dissenters was only a few degrees better than the state of the church. The toleration which they enjoyed from William III's time was certainly productive of a very bad spiritual effect on them as a body. As soon as they ceased to be persecuted, they appear to have gone to sleep. The Baptist and Independent could still point to Gill and Guise and Doddridge and Watts and a few more like-minded men, but the English Presbyterians were fast lapsing into Socinianism. And as to the great majority of nonconformists, it is vain to deny that they were very different men from Baxter and Flavel and Gurnall and Trail. A generation of preachers arose who were very orthodox but painfully cold, very conscientious but very wanting in spirituality, very